Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're breaking down one of the most dramatic and politically explosive events in modern history, the moment when the bridge to Crimea went down in a massive explosion that sent shockwaves through Russia and the entire world. The destruction of the Crimea Bridge, often called the Kerch Bridge, wasn't just a physical collapse. It was a direct hit on Russia's image, its strategy, and the leadership of Vladimir Putin. What started as a quiet morning quickly turned into chaos, fire, and disbelief, a scene that would mark one of the biggest turning points in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. When the bridge was built, it was more than a construction project. It was a symbol of dominance. After Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, the bridge became Putin's personal trophy, a 12-mile long structure connecting Russia to the Crimean Peninsula, meant to show the world that Crimea was now fully under Russian control. Built with billions of dollars and guarded heavily, it represented power, unity, and permanence. But all of that would come crashing down in one fiery moment that no one in Moscow could have imagined. The explosion happened early in the morning. Drivers crossing the bridge described hearing a massive boom, followed by a wave of heat and light. Within seconds, fire erupted across the roadway, and sections of the bridge began to collapse. Videos captured from nearby vehicles showed the horrifying moment when the blast tore through the structure. A massive ball of fire lit up the sky, followed by thick black smoke curling into the air. The bridge, once seen as untouchable, was burning. The shock spread instantly. Social media flooded with footage and speculation. Was it a truck bomb, a drone strike, a coordinated sabotage mission? The truth was unclear, but what everyone could see was that Russia's most symbolic bridge had been crippled. For a country that prided itself on control and security, this was a devastating embarrassment. The bridge wasn't just infrastructure, it was an extension of the Kremlin's pride. Russia's initial response was chaotic. Officials tried to downplay the situation, calling it an incident caused by a vehicle explosion. But images told another story. Huge sections of the road had fallen into the sea. The train track running alongside it was engulfed in flames, with oil tankers burning uncontrollably. This wasn't a minor accident. This was a deliberate strike, and it struck at the very core of Russian confidence. Putin's government moved quickly to frame the narrative. Within hours, he blamed Ukrainian intelligence services for carrying out a terrorist act. He described the explosion as a direct attack on Russian sovereignty and vowed severe retaliation. For him, it wasn't just a loss of infrastructure, it was a personal insult. The Crimea Bridge was one of his most public achievements, and seeing it reduced to rubble on global television was a humiliation few leaders could endure quietly. In Moscow, security meetings were held immediately. Russian officials demanded answers. How could this have happened under their watch? The bridge had been heavily guarded since the start of the war. It was supposed to be one of the most secure structures in the country. But as investigations began, it became clear that the attack was sophisticated. The explosion was timed perfectly to target both the road and the railway. It wasn't just about destruction, it was about sending a message. For Ukraine, that message was clear. The bridge was a vital supply line for Russian troops stationed in southern Ukraine. It carried ammunition, fuel, and reinforcements. Destroying it didn't just hurt Russia's pride, it hit their logistics hard. With that bridge down, moving supplies to the front lines became a nightmare. Every convoy now had to take longer, riskier routes through occupied territories. Strategically, it was a major blow to the Russian war machine. While Ukrainian officials didn't officially claim responsibility, their reaction spoke volumes. Posts appeared on social media celebrating the explosion. One Ukrainian government account posted, "Sick burn," with an image of the flaming bridge. For many Ukrainians, it was poetic justice, a symbol of occupation finally collapsing. The bridge that represented Russia's hold on Crimea had fallen, and it fell spectacularly. International reactions were immediate. Western nations watched closely, analyzing satellite images and videos of the destruction. Military experts called the blast one of the most symbolic attacks of the war, a strike that would ripple far beyond its physical damage. News channels around the world ran the footage on repeat: the burning bridge over blue waters, smoke stretching high into the sky. It was the image of defiance, a perfect snapshot of how fragile power can be when challenged. Inside Russia, the mood shifted drastically. What was once seen as a distant war suddenly felt much closer. The bridge had connected Russia directly to Crimea. Now, with it destroyed, many Russians began to feel isolated. The incident stirred anger, confusion, and fear. Citizens began to question the government's ability to protect critical infrastructure. The illusion of control that the Kremlin had worked so hard to maintain was breaking apart. Putin's response was fierce. Days after the explosion, Russia launched massive missile strikes across Ukraine, hitting power plants, communication networks, and civilian areas. Dozens were killed and cities were plunged into darkness. The message was clear: this was payback. But even with this retaliation, the damage to Russia's image was done. The world had already seen the vulnerability. The idea of an untouchable Russia had vanished in the smoke over the Kerch Strait. The attack also exposed cracks within Russia's military and intelligence systems. How could such an important target be so unprotected? If Ukraine or any other force could hit the Crimea Bridge, what else could they reach? Analysts began to question the strength of Russian defenses and the coordination within their military. The Kremlin tried to project strength, but internally it was chaos. Meetings were heated, blame was passed around, and pressure mounted on security officials. For Putin personally, this was a nightmare scenario. The Crimea Bridge was one of his proudest achievements, a structure he personally opened and had often used as a symbol of victory. Its destruction came at a time when his forces were already struggling on the battlefield. It amplified the perception that his grip on power was weakening. Within Russia's elite circles, whispers began to grow, whispers of frustration, doubt, and even quiet fear. On the ground in Crimea, the aftermath was grim. The once busy bridge stood silent. Sections were twisted and broken, blackened by fire. Rescue teams searched through the wreckage for survivors. The smell of burning fuel lingered in the air for days. It was more than a physical ruin, it was the end of an illusion. For years, that bridge had stood as a reminder of Russia's expansion. Now it stood as proof that nothing built on force lasts forever. Over the next few weeks, Russia scrambled to repair the bridge. Engineers worked around the clock to restore traffic, and propaganda outlets aired footage of workers rebuilding as proof of resilience. But everyone knew the truth. Even if the bridge was repaired, the message couldn't be undone. The explosion had changed everything. Every driver crossing that bridge from then on would remember the fire, the smoke, and the day it fell. Internationally, the explosion deepened the divide between Russia and the West. It also signaled a new phase of the war, one where infrastructure and symbols became primary targets. No longer was the fight confined to battlefields. Now the war was being waged through psychological blows, each one aimed at weakening the enemy's spirit. The fall of the Crimea Bridge wasn't just a military operation. It was psychological warfare at its finest. This event also reignited global discussions about escalation. Could this lead Russia to take even more drastic steps? Would it push the conflict closer to a dangerous tipping point? For a few tense days, the world watched nervously, waiting to see how far Putin would go in response. His aggressive missile strikes showed his fury, but they also revealed desperation. The more he tried to appear powerful, the more it exposed how shaken his leadership had become. In Ukraine, the explosion became a symbol of hope. After months of loss and destruction, this moment reminded people that Russia could be hit where it hurts. It proved that Ukraine's resistance wasn't just surviving, it was fighting back with intelligence and precision. For civilians and soldiers alike, the image of that burning bridge became a symbol of defiance and resilience. As investigators dug deeper, the mystery of how the explosion happened continued to grow. Russia's official story claimed it was a truck bomb smuggled onto the bridge. Others suggested it was a drone attack or explosives planted by divers beneath the structure. Whatever the method, one thing was clear: the attack required careful planning, inside knowledge, and flawless timing. It wasn't random. It was calculated to create maximum damage and psychological impact. Weeks later, even as repairs began, the narrative continued to haunt the Kremlin. The bridge was technically restored, but the fear of another attack lingered. Russian military convoys avoided it whenever possible, and security was tightened across every strategic location. It was as if the entire country had become paranoid. The sense of absolute control had evaporated, replaced by anxiety and doubt. In hindsight, the destruction of the Crimea Bridge was more than a single act of sabotage. It was a shift in the course of the war, a moment that redefined what was possible. It showed that no target was truly safe, and that symbols of power can become weaknesses in an instant. It reminded the world that even superpowers can bleed when struck in the right place. For Putin, the bridge's fall will likely remain one of the most haunting chapters of his legacy. It represented everything he stood for: control, pride, and defiance. And seeing it crumble symbolized the unraveling of his ambitions. Even though reconstruction efforts made the bridge usable again, it could never regain its symbolic strength. The world will remember the image of that fiery explosion as more than just a scene of destruction. It was the moment when the narrative of Russian dominance cracked open. It showed the fragility of power built on fear and the strength of resistance built on purpose. It turned a bridge meant to unite into a global reminder of chaos and consequence. As time passes, historians will look back at that moment not just as a physical event, but as a turning point in global politics. The bridge that once connected lands now connects two truths: that even the mightiest fall, and that no structure, no leader, and no regime is immune to collapse when met with enough resistance. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world. Stay aware, stay curious, and remember, sometimes it only takes one spark to bring down an empire.